On September 11th, 2013, in Rende District, Tainan City, Taiwan, local residents Wu Yonglong and his wife Huang Puju took their dog Pang Pang out for their usual walk. The area was surrounded mainly by fruit orchards and rice paddies, peaceful and unremarkable. While the couple strolled leisurely, Pang Pang roamed freely. The dog enthusiastically weaved between rows of trees, jumped over small paths, and occasionally disappeared into the thick bushes along the fields. After a while, when the dog returned to its owners, it was carrying a bone with bits of flesh still attached. Yonglong didn't think twice about it. In rural areas, dogs bringing back bones from wild animals like boars or monkeys was nothing unusual. Without much thought, he picked up the bone from Pang Pang's mouth and casually tossed it into a nearby bush. But Pang Pang thought its owner was playing fetch. The dog immediately dove into the bush and eagerly retrieved the bone. At that moment, Yonglong took a closer look. The more he examined it, the more uneasy he felt. The shape and size of that bone didn't look like any animal bone he knew. It increasingly resembled a human arm. A chill ran down his spine instantly. Realizing the severity of the situation, Yonglong immediately called the police. Upon receiving the report, police quickly dispatched officers to the scene. After cordoning off the surrounding area, they began interviewing those involved, with Yonglong being the first to recount everything that had happened that day. During his statement, Yonglong suddenly remembered that a few days earlier, in the vegetable garden behind his house, he had seen what looked like decomposing animal remains. In rural areas, such sights weren't uncommon. Dead boars, monkeys, or other wild animals that had died from illness or accidents appeared regularly. So at the time, he hadn't thought twice about it and simply used metal tongs to pick it up and toss it into the bushes. However, the previous evening, while walking past the dog kennel behind his house, Yonglong caught a strong, foul odor. Following the smell, he discovered that Pang Pang had somehow retrieved that bone again and placed it near the kennel. Feeling disgusted but still not thinking the worst, Yonglong once again used the metal tongs to pick up the bone. This time, to prevent the dog from bringing it back, he threw it over the fence. When forensic investigators arrived at the scene and carefully examined the find, they quickly confirmed that what had been discovered was indeed a section of a human right forearm. Recognizing the severity of the situation, police immediately sealed off the entire field area, expanding their search perimeter in hopes of finding more related clues. Sure enough, not long after, also within the same field, about 50 feet from the initial discovery site, search teams found another section of a left forearm, though it was no longer intact. However, their luck seemed to stop there. After the second discovery, the search quickly hit a dead end. Despite continuously adding more personnel and expanding the search area, even draining the pond next to the field, police found nothing more. They even mobilized local funeral home workers, people experienced in searching for bodies, to conduct a grid search, leaving no patch of ground or bush unchecked. It wasn't until noon on September 13th, when everyone had nearly reached a state of exhaustion and frustration, that Pang Pang once again became the key factor. While being walked, Pang Pang suddenly bolted toward a guava orchard, about 650 feet from the field. The dog appeared extremely agitated, continuously rooting through the thick grass as if searching for something. Just seconds later, to everyone's astonishment, Pang Pang dragged out a white plastic bag, emitting such an intense, putrid odor that people nearby immediately backed away. Right beside the bag lay a torn 6.6-pound rice sack, discarded in the bushes. Realizing the situation might be even more serious than what they had already discovered, Yonglong didn't hesitate to call the police once again. When police quickly arrived at the scene and unwrapped layer after layer, the sight before them made everyone shudder. Inside the plastic bag was a human head, wrapped carefully in 3 layers of plastic bags, with a pillowcase tied tightly around the outside, not yet fully decomposed. Immediately afterward, all evidence collected from the scene was urgently transported to the forensic laboratory for in-depth examination. However, the investigation hit a wall from the very first steps. The the recovered head had decomposed severely, with soft tissue so badly damaged that facial features were completely unrecognizable, meaning all efforts to identify the victim through appearance were futile. Even more critically, the most crucial lead for identification, fingerprints, was also unusable. The fingers on the severed forearm had been severely gnawed by dogs, completely destroying the fingerprint ridges, leaving technicians unable to extract any valid data. Faced with this impasse, investigators had no choice but to place all their remaining hope in DNA comparison. However, at that time, the DNA database only stored information from serious criminals and wasn't as comprehensive as it is today. Analysis results showed that the head and two severed forearms definitely belonged to the same individual, ruling out the possibility that the evidence came from multiple victims. Nevertheless, all comparison attempts yielded no results, as no matches were found in the existing database. The victim's identity remained a complete mystery. With extremely limited leads, forensic specialists were forced to piece together the smallest remaining details, attempting to construct a biological profile of the victim. Through bone analysis and remaining characteristics, they deduced that the victim was a woman between 20 and 45 years old, with long curly hair and an estimated height between 5 feet 1 inch and 5 feet 3 inches. Notably, the victim's dental features were highly distinctive for identification purposes. The midline between the two front teeth was noticeably shifted, while the right front tooth grew inward at an angle, creating a rare dental structure. Additionally, the ear-piercing holes were positioned unusually high, leading police to suspect the victim might be a foreigner, or at least not a local resident. Based on these valuable data points, police immediately brought in a colleague with forensic sketch expertise to draw a composite portrait of the victim. Simultaneously, a cooperation bulletin was quickly distributed with detailed descriptions, and a specialized team was assigned to receive and screen incoming tips from the public. Over the following 2 weeks, the specialized team screened more than 80 calls from citizens, carefully verifying and cross-referencing each one. After a lengthy elimination process, police finally zeroed in on a particularly noteworthy call from Kaohsiung. The caller reported that his wife was a foreigner who had recently gone missing for several days because she owed a large sum to an underground money-lending operation. What immediately caught police attention was that this money-lending operation was located right in Rende district, matching the location where the body was found. Furthermore, when asked for more details, the man described his wife's dental features, and remarkably, they matched perfectly with the characteristics police had released. In that moment, the atmosphere in the office seemed to brighten. Police believed the case had finally reached an important breakthrough. However, just as hope emerged, the caller provided photos of his wife from daily life. One glance at the photo, and everyone's hearts sank. In the image, the woman's protruding tooth was clearly on the left side, completely inconsistent with the forensic identification. The hope that had just flickered was immediately extinguished, and what seemed like a clear lead turned into another dead end. Just when the team had almost no idea where to continue, an unexpected phone call rang through the police station. On the other end was a man named Zhou Wenguang. He introduced himself as a chef at a restaurant in Taipei and reported that his Vietnamese girlfriend, Du Trang, had been out of contact since March 23rd. Wenguang said that when he saw the cooperation bulletin released by police, an indescribable sense of dread immediately welled up inside him. The characteristics described in the bulletin matched Trang almost point by point, but what sent chills down his spine was the pillowcase used to wrap the innermost layer around the head. He was certain it was identical to the pillowcase he had once bought and given to Trang. Police didn't dare take any chances. That very night, they immediately located Zhou Wenguang, met with him in person to verify the information, and obtained photos of Du Trang from her daily life. The moment they saw the photo, everyone present seemed to snap to attention. In the frame, Du Trang was smiling brightly, and immediately visible was the protruding tooth on her upper right side, along with the noticeably shifted midline between her front teeth, matching almost perfectly with the identification characteristics forensics had previously established. By this point, investigators were about 80% certain the victim's identity had been confirmed. However, for a case this serious, Speculation alone wasn't enough. To avoid any possible error, police decided to conduct verification at the highest level. They continued by contacting Dieu Trang's cousin who was living in Taiwan, and through her, established communication with Trang's mother and daughter in Vietnam. Immediately afterward, a Taiwanese criminal affairs officer stationed in Vietnam was urgently dispatched from Ho Chi Minh City to Hanoi to personally collect saliva samples from the victim's relatives. Without a moment's delay, these biological samples were immediately brought back to Taiwan for DNA comparison with the victim. The final results came quickly. DNA analysis confirmed the victim was Leti Dieu Trang, a Vietnamese woman who had come to Taiwan for work. After confirming the victim's identity, police immediately turned to answering a more important question: who had killed her? The first person police summoned and thoroughly interrogated was Zhou Wenguang, the man who had proactively called to report the case and claimed to be Dieu Trang's boyfriend. However, the deeper the investigation went, the more suspicious his identity became. Trang's cousin in Taiwan, as well as family members in Vietnam, all confirmed they had never heard of Wen Guang and had no idea she had such a boyfriend. On top of that, police discovered that in Vietnam, Dieu Trang was already married with a child. This fact made Wen Guang's self-proclaimed boyfriend title extremely dubious. From someone who appeared to be an innocent tipster, Wen Guang quickly became a prime suspect. Wen Guang ultimately chose to cooperate and confessed honestly. He admitted that Trang was indeed married in Vietnam, and moreover, her husband was also living and working in Taiwan. Wen Guang explained that he had met Trang through work in 2013. Initially, their interactions were purely professional, but over time, their relationship crossed the boundaries of mere colleagues. According to Wen Guang, March 23rd was the very day Trang completely disappeared. That day, he and Trang had arranged to meet at a park to talk. Unexpectedly, Trang's husband suddenly appeared, catching them together on the spot. The confrontation quickly escalated into a fierce argument among all three, with accusations flying back and forth, no one willing to back down. Finally, amid the tense and chaotic atmosphere, all three parted ways in anger and discord. Wen Guang stated that the last time he spoke with Trang was that evening. During the phone call, Trang's voice was trembling with panic as she told him she was having a terrible argument with her husband. Trang begged Wen Guang to come pick her up as soon as possible. However, at that moment, Wen Guang was busy with work and couldn't leave immediately. He could only try to calm Trang down, promising to call back after his shift ended. But when work was over and he tried to reach her again, Trang's phone went unanswered. From that moment on, Trang had completely vanished. Following Wen Guang's testimony, police continued to contact Trang's mother, Mrs. Nguyen Thi Lien, along with her brother, Le Min Tan. They reported that Trang and her husband, Phung Min Huai, had gone to Taiwan together for work some time ago. On the surface, their marriage hadn't completely fallen apart, but in reality, arguments had been occurring with increasing frequency. According to family members, Trang had called home multiple times in states of exhaustion and despair, complaining that her husband had extreme jealousy issues and was always suspicious and controlling of her. Beyond just words, during one conflict, he had actually struck Trang, causing the family great concern. Most frighteningly, during one conversation with her mother, Trang had uttered words that would haunt her mother forever afterward. "Sooner or later, I'm going to die at his hands." The last call Mrs. Nguyen Thi Lien received from her daughter was around 10 p.m. on March 23rd. On the other end of the line, Trang was sobbing uncontrollably, her voice trembling with fear. She choked out that she desperately wanted to return to Vietnam, otherwise she was afraid Hawaii would kill her. However, in that moment, Mrs. Lien simply thought it was just venting during a serious marital argument, something many families had experienced. She gently comforted her daughter with a few words, urging Trang to try to stay calm, never imagining that would be the last time mother and daughter would ever speak. Another lead gradually emerged from the landlord of Trang's rental residence. He reported that around noon on March 24th, while passing by the rental area, he saw an unfamiliar man standing on the balcony of Trang's room, busily gathering large and small bags of luggage. Having never seen this person before, the landlord felt something was off and called out, "What are you doing here?" The man turned around and answered in a heavy foreign accent, curtly, "Helping someone move their things." At that moment, the landlord didn't see any sign of Trang, but without clear evidence and not wanting to interfere too deeply in his tenant's private affairs, he didn't ask further questions. It wasn't until the case broke open that he suddenly realized that scene had been full of abnormal signs, and a belated sense of unease crept over him. Not only did testimony from multiple witnesses consistently point toward Trang's husband, Feng Min Huai, but the investigation also revealed additional decisive details. Police discovered that the foam factory where Huai worked was located right in Rende District, Tainan, and more notably, the dormitory where he lived was separated from the guava orchard, where the body was found, by just a single wall. This spatial coincidence made it nearly impossible for Huai to stand outside the circle of suspicion. Nevertheless, at that point, police still hadn't secured direct evidence sufficient to charge Huai. However, the actual situation wouldn't allow them to hesitate any longer. The case was spreading like wildfire through the foreign worker community, especially among Vietnamese laborers. On social media, numerous posts were being shared frantically with shocking headlines like "Vietnamese man murders wife and dismembers body," and Huai's photo had even been posted publicly, making him the target of collective outrage. The tension quickly spilled into the real world. Outside the police station, many Vietnamese workers gathered, holding up phones displaying Huai's image, almost unanimously identifying him as the killer. Facing mounting public pressure, police understood clearly. If the suspect realized he had been identified and began to flee, the manhunt would become exponentially more difficult, potentially leading to unforeseen consequences. Therefore, on October 2nd, police decided to concentrate their forces, coordinating with prosecutors to proceed directly to the company where Huai worked, preparing to make an arrest. When the task force arrived at the dormitory, what surprised everyone was how completely calm Huai appeared. His face showed no signs of panic or fear whatsoever. When police, through an interpreter, asked about his wife's whereabouts, Huai's answers began to become vague and inconsistent. At times, he said he hadn't seen his wife in a long time and didn't know where she was. Other times, he guessed she might still be in Taoyuan. Throughout the entire response, Huai absolutely never mentioned the possibility that his wife had met with misfortune, much less that she had been murdered. However, when police stated the truth directly, that Trang had not only been killed, but had been dismembered in a particularly brutal manner, and showed him images of the severed forearm and head that had been found, Huai's face showed no fear, no shock, and certainly none of the grief or devastation one would expect from someone who had just lost a loved one. Though Huai continued to firmly deny all accusations, the chain of physical evidence combined with witness testimony had linked together tightly, forming an increasingly clear picture that all pointed toward him. Recognizing they couldn't delay any further, prosecutors immediately ordered Huai's detention that same day. Simultaneously, all belongings in his dormitory room were sealed and seized, brought back to the police station for in-depth investigation. The investigative team understood very clearly that from this point forward, they needed to mentally prepare for a prolonged battle. Later, both the prosecutor in charge of the case and the investigation team leader frankly admitted, interrogating a foreign suspect was an extremely difficult task. The reason lay in the language barrier itself. Every question, once it had to go through an interpreter to be conveyed, lost the tone of voice, psychological pressure, eye contact, and facial expressions that were important weapons for investigators. Whether police chose a gentle, patient approach or switched to a harsh, pressuring tone, Huai remained cold and evasive. For questions he didn't want to answer, he simply repeated a few simple phrases like, "I don't know," or "I don't understand." What made investigators even more frustrated was that Huai had been living and working in Taiwan long enough to clearly have basic Mandarin communication abilities. Yet in the interrogation room, he deliberately pretended to be helpless with the language, turning the interpreter into a perfect shield for avoiding responsibility. Faced with this impasse, prosecutors had few options left and could only continuously file motions to extend his legal detention period, hoping that the pressure of time and circumstances would soon force Hawaii to tell the truth. However, while the interrogation front remained at a standstill, prosecutors and police absolutely did not sit idle. Parallel to the questioning, they spread out all the collected evidence before them, item by item, determined to find the key to cracking the case from even the smallest seeming details. Besides the pillowcase that Zhou Wenguang had recognized earlier, and which, after verification, matched exactly with the bedding at the rental where Trang had lived, the black plastic bag that appeared unremarkable on the outer wrapping layer actually contained important abnormal signs. Through measurement and analysis, police discovered the plastic bag used to wrap the victim's head measured exactly 25 by 23 inches. This was a special specification, not the type of common bag easily purchased on the market. Following this lead, police successively summoned the manager and purchasing staff of the foam factory where Hawaii worked for questioning. In response to investigators' questions, both confirmed that this type of plastic bag was indeed custom manufactured according to company requirements, not sold externally at all, but within the company premises, employees could obtain them quite easily. At police request, the company provided identical plastic bags for comparison purposes. After careful examination, specialists discovered that not only did the dimensions match exactly, but each plastic bag, being produced on different machines, left behind unique patterns. Under direct light, the sample bag provided by the foam company and the bag wrapping the head at the crime scene revealed patterns that were completely identical. This virtually eliminated the possibility of random coincidence and became an extremely important link connecting Hawaii directly to the disposal site. Additionally, the torn 6.6-pound rice sack also became important evidence. Police continued to summon Hawaii's roommates, including Wang Dekai, Nguyen the Tuan, and several other related individuals. These people all confirmed that because this type of 6.6-pound rice was the cheapest available, Hawaii often bought large quantities at once, bringing them back to the dormitory to use gradually. In fact, the dormitory storage room still had many empty rice sacks of the same type piled up. Police immediately went to inspect the storage room directly, and the results confirmed that the rice sack found at the scene matched exactly in style, material, and labeling with the remaining sacks in storage. Time moved to November 5, 2013. This was the 11th interrogation police conducted with Fung Min, Hawaii. And from the moment they stepped into the questioning room, the atmosphere was completely different from previous sessions. No more probing questions or beating around the bush. This time, the truth was laid directly on the table. Before Hawaii, all the key pieces of evidence had been arranged one by one. From the custom black plastic bag made specifically for the company, the matching 6.6-pound rice sack found at the scene, to the crucial pillowcase. These pieces of evidence formed a complete and undeniable chain. The prosecutor kept his voice calm, speaking slowly but decisively, explaining clearly all the investigation results to Hawaii. Each detail, each link was presented coherently, as if the suspect's final layers of defense were being stripped away mercilessly. And right at that moment, the first signs of psychological breakdown appeared. Hawaii's eyebrows twitched slightly, the corners of his mouth trembled involuntarily, reactions he had tried to conceal throughout the previous 10 interrogations. At that very instant, the pace of interrogation suddenly changed. The investigation team leader abruptly raised his voice, eyes sharp and cold, words cutting straight to the heart of the matter. All the evidence has been laid out before you. And another thing, you've been insisting you don't have any of Trang's belongings. So why did we find her phone in your room? He continued pressing step by step, his voice carrying heavy weight. Look at the call history yourself. Before March 23rd, this phone's signal was in the northern region, but on the 24th and 25th, the signal appeared right at your dormitory. The truth is already clear before your eyes. How long do you want to keep lying? That direct blow struck like a hammer against the psychological defenses Hawaii had worked to build. He stood frozen, his gaze becoming empty and evasive, the first crack finally appearing. After a suffocating silence, Huai lowered his head, his voice cold and emotionless, uttering only a single sentence. "I don't need her anymore." The team leader keenly shifted tactics immediately, leaning forward, using a voice so gentle it was almost a whisper. "Actually, you really loved your wife, didn't you? After all, she's still the mother of your child." The word child was like a key, precisely unlocking the softest corner deep within Huai's heart. Thinking of his little daughter far away in his homeland, this seemingly cold man finally collapsed completely, sobbing uncontrollably on the spot, before admitting that his wife Trang's death was indeed caused by his own hands. At this point, Huai slowly recounted the entire sequence of events. Huai explained that when he was 29 years old and Leti Dieu Trang was 28, the two met and fell in love in their home country of Vietnam. In 2007, when they discovered Trang was pregnant, they quickly held a wedding, and on June 5th of that year, their first daughter was born. The birth of the child should have been complete happiness, but that joy was quickly weighed down by life's harsh realities. Neither Huai nor Trang had much education, and the jobs they could find in Vietnam only provided meager income, completely insufficient to support a young family. Growing economic pressure gradually pushed their married life into a vicious cycle. There were peaceful moments, but there were also plenty of conflicts erupting over money, arguments following one after another endlessly. By 2011, after many discussions, the two decided to go abroad for work, hoping to save enough money to return to Vietnam, buy a house, and secure their daughter's future. To realize this plan, they borrowed a total of $13,500 from relatives and friends to pay for labor export agency fees. Afterward, Huai and Trang went to Taiwan for work on September 11th and November 24th, respectively. Their young daughter was left in Vietnam under the care of Trang's mother, and the couple promised each other they would regularly send living expenses back home. Carrying their gold rush dreams to a foreign land, they believed that just a few years of hard work could change their lives. However, it wasn't until they actually set foot in Taiwan that both bitterly realized reality was nothing like what they had imagined. Foreign workers were already in a disadvantaged position, easily exploited, not only having to do heavier work than local laborers, but receiving disproportionately lower wages. Meanwhile, they still had to bear the enormous debt they had taken on to go abroad for work. Forget about saving to buy a house. The monthly debt repayment pressure alone was suffocating them, and they could only save on their own food and expenses to have enough money to send back to Vietnam. Huai was assigned to work at the foam factory and adapted relatively well to the new environment. Thanks to his hard-working and diligent nature, he quickly got the hang of the work routine and made friends with a group of fellow countrymen working at the same place. In a foreign land, being able to hear his native language and chat in familiar tones provided Huai with some sense of comfort and emotional support. He told himself that as long as he worked hard, sooner or later, he could earn enough money to support his family and daughter back home. However, Leti Dieu Trang, who had been assigned to Hualien, had a completely different experience. The days working at the food processing plant quickly wore down both her physical strength and mental state. The heavy workload, high intensity, and confined environment left Trang exhausted to the point of suffocation, with feelings of hopelessness piling up day by day. She tried to endure for half a year, but ultimately couldn't continue pushing through. By June 2012, Trang left without a word, quietly fleeing Hualien, escaping from her workplace, then using a fake name to go to Taipei to find new work. She understood clearly that runaway workers would be classified as illegal laborers, and once discovered would be immediately deported. However, in reality, because employers could pay lower wages, quite a few bosses were willing to hire such workers despite the legal risks. In that murky environment, Trang quickly found work at a restaurant in Taipei in November 2012 and gradually settled into life there. Though the couple had to live apart in different places, Huai still tried to maintain their marriage in his own way. Each month, he used his precious 2 to 3 days off to take the bus north to visit his wife, accepting a 6 to 7 hour round trip just to see Trang for a short while. At that time, their feelings for each other were still very sweet. During one outing together, Trang had half-jokingly, half-seriously said, "If you dare cheat on me, I'll drown you." Huai just laughed when he heard this, then teased back, "Well, if you dare cheat on me, I'll chop you into 3 pieces." Those seemingly horrifying words were, at the time, viewed merely as an extreme form of lovers' vows because both believed they could walk together to the end of the road. No one could have imagined that very statement would later become a chilling omen, inseparably linked to a tragedy beyond all imagination. The prolonged separation gradually made Trang forget the belief she once shared with her husband about working together toward their future and the picture they had painted together. As Trang's work in Taipei became more routine, her Mandarin also became increasingly fluent, allowing her to start chatting and socializing with colleagues at the restaurant. Whether due to necessary work interactions or because her emotions as someone alone in a foreign land needed somewhere to rest, Trang and Chef Wen Guang grew closer and closer, gradually developing into a romantic relationship. Trang thought she could hide it, but Huai always cared about his wife. How could he not notice the changes in her? By January 2013, the suspicions that had been smoldering inside Huai were finally ignited. During one moment of inadvertent observation, he secretly discovered that Trang was using 2 phones simultaneously. His instinctive unease drove him to question her relentlessly, and only then did Trang admit that one of the phones had been given to her by another man. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Huai slapped Trang. But his fury didn't stop there. Obsessed with the feeling of betrayal, Huai secretly contacted the telecommunications company and managed to obtain Trang's call history. From the numbers that appeared in the records, he traced Zhou Wenguang's phone number, thereby confirming once again that his wife was having an affair. Yet even with the truth exposed, Huai didn't immediately let go. He chose to give Trang a chance to turn back, perhaps for their daughter's sake, for the years they had spent together, or out of fear of losing the last family he was holding on to. In front of her husband, Trang swore she would end all contact with Wenguang, promising to return to their married life as before. But from that moment on, Huai's trust could never be restored to what it once was. Suspicion gnawed at him day by day. Huai began constantly calling Wenguang, not to talk, but to interrogate. Whether he was still in contact with Trang, whether they were still meeting, whether they had been physically intimate. Then, the tragedy continued its downward slide. Trang had barely made her promise to her husband before she quickly broke it again. Not only did she not cut things off, but she continued maintaining the love triangle between herself, Wenguang, and Huai. The secrecy gradually became an open secret in the shadows. By mid-March 2013, Trang had even moved into a small apartment in Tamsui that Wenguang had rented specifically for her. There, the two began an on-and-off cohabitation. Time moved to March 24th, 2013. That day was one of Huai's rare days off. Early in the morning, he rode his bicycle to the Tainan bus station, then took the long-distance bus heading north, carrying within him all the suspicion, jealousy, and anxiety that had accumulated over many months. On the other side, Trang also told Wenguang that she would go to the market to buy groceries and cook a meal for Huai. Hearing this, Wenguang couldn't help but feel confused and puzzled. He directly asked Trang, "You're always saying your husband hits you and he knows you're having an affair. So why are you still bringing him to the apartment I rented for you?" Trang didn't answer directly, only vaguely dodging the question and quickly changing the subject, as if she herself didn't want to face the contradiction she was creating. By midday, Huai arrived in Taipei. He walked to the restaurant where Trang worked, intending to see his wife and have things out. However, on the way, right at the small park next to the restaurant, he saw Trang and Wenguang sitting close together, acting intimately. In that moment, Huai seemed to lose all reason. Jealousy and the feeling of betrayal exploded violently. He charged straight over, loudly confronting Wenguang. Why was he continuing to be involved with Trang when he clearly knew she had a family? Faced with this anger, Wenguang hurriedly argued that he had absolutely no idea Trang was married. Sensing the situation escalating and fearing the conflict would spiral out of control, Trang quickly intervened, telling Huai she needed to get back to work, asking him to go somewhere else to walk around for a while. But things didn't stop there. Not long after they separated, Trang proactively called Huai. Over the phone, she said coldly, "I've already quit my job. I won't be coming here to work anymore, and don't come looking for me either." With that, Trang hung up immediately. That brief phone call left Huai both furious and deeply wounded. Unable to accept that everything was ending with just a few cold words, he demanded that Trang talk things through face to face. After numerous attempts to reach her, the two arranged to meet that evening at Shuanglian MRT station, not far from where Trang worked. After work, Trang arrived at Shuanglian MRT station as arranged. The moment they met, she immediately told Huai that she had broken up with Wen Guang and had returned the phone, as if trying to prove that everything was over. Afterward, the two boarded the MRT together, returning to the small apartment in Tam Sui where Trang was living. In that cramped space, they began discussing their future, their marriage, their daughter, and whether they could still continue walking together. However, by this point, Huai's trust in Trang had completely collapsed. Every word she spoke was met with his suspicion. Every explanation became kindling that ignited his jealousy and resentment. The conversation that was supposed to resolve issues quickly devolved into an argument, voices growing increasingly sharp, neither willing to yield. Feeling unable to continue communicating, around 8 p.m., Trang secretly made 2 phone calls to Wen Guang, asking if he could come to the apartment to pick her up and take her away. On the other end of the line, Wen Guang said he was busy in the restaurant kitchen at that moment and absolutely couldn't leave. Trang didn't plead further, nor did she try calling again, but notably, she also didn't choose to leave the apartment. She stayed, as if trapped between 2 choices she couldn't bring herself to make. Time passed in the heavy atmosphere. At 10:05 p.m., Trang called her mother in Vietnam. During that call, her voice was filled with fear and despair as she said she desperately wanted to return to Vietnam. Otherwise, she was afraid Huai would kill her. On the other end, Mrs. Lin simply thought it was a serious marital argument, gently comforted her daughter with a few words, then hung up. Trang returned to the room and lay down on the bed beside Huai. Right at that seemingly quiet moment, everything suddenly took an irreversible turn. The woman who had just said she had broken up with her lover suddenly changed her tone, demanding that Huai divorce her. Not only that, Trang firmly declared she would not give up custody of their daughter, as if she had made the final decision about their marriage. The words that followed struck like knives straight into Huai's pride. Trang mocked and attacked him, saying Huai earned too little money and had no sense of responsibility, that he couldn't even support himself, so what right did he have to raise their daughter? After saying those words, Trang started to turn and leave the room. Severely triggered by her words, Huai instantly lost control of his emotions. He pulled her back onto the bed, then used his right hand to strangle her neck, before turning his body to pin down Trang, who was now face down in the pillow. He said into her ear, "You cheated. You don't deserve to be loved. You especially don't deserve to be a mother." Trang struggled violently beneath Huai, then gradually went still. Only then did Huai get up and go to the balcony to smoke. But when he returned to the room, he discovered his wife had stopped breathing. Huai said that night he held his wife's body and slept until 6 a.m. the next morning, March 24th, when he woke up. He recalled dreaming the night before that Trang had asked to be brought back with him to Tainan. Looking at Trang's cold body, Huai remembered the words he had once said to her. He found a fruit knife and a small kitchen knife in the apartment, dragged Trang into the bathroom, covered her face with a pillowcase, and began his criminal act. However, both knives were too dull to succeed. At 9 a.m., Huai went out to the nearby market and bought a large knife to continue his crime. When finished, he wrapped Trang's head in the pillowcase, along with both forearms and blood-stained clothing, and stuffed them into Trang's suitcase. The upper body was dressed in a small tank top, then wrapped in multiple layers of pillowcase and plastic bags and stuffed into a crossbody bag. The lower body was placed in a black plastic bag and put into a canvas tote. Afterward, Huai thoroughly cleaned the apartment, then divided all the blood-stained tissues and 3 knives into 2 packages, throwing them into nearby bushes and a roadside trash can. At noon, around 12 o'clock, after confirming everything had been properly cleaned up, he carried 3 bags of luggage downstairs, preparing to hail a taxi to leave. It was precisely at this moment that he was spotted by Trang's landlord. Hawaii carried 3 large bags of luggage to the road outside the apartment to hail a taxi. Police later summoned the taxi driver, who confirmed that Hawaii had indeed taken his cab to Tainan. The driver recalled that his impression of this passenger was very deep. The man first said he wanted to go to Taipei Station, then changed his mind and said he wanted to go to Tainan. When the driver quoted 5,000 Taiwan dollars, approximately $160, the man agreed without hesitation. This was completely unlike Vietnamese workers, who typically saved money by only taking short rides, and the large and small pieces of luggage he was carrying made an unforgettable impression. After a journey of nearly 186 miles, Hawaii got off at the bus station where his bicycle was parked. He temporarily left all the luggage bags there, then switched to riding his bicycle to dispose of the body parts in different locations. First, he threw the crossbody bag containing the upper body into the drainage ditch under Rende Bridge No. 1. Next, he rode to near the company where he worked, took the plastic bag containing the lower body out of the canvas tote, and threw it into the bushes. The canvas tote was discarded on the roadside a few hundred yards away. Finally, he left the suitcase containing the head and forearms at the abandoned factory area of Yan Yuan Company, then returned to his company dormitory to rest, preparing for work the next day. On March 25th, Hawaii went to work as usual, with none of his colleagues noticing anything abnormal. After getting off work at 9 p.m., he took rice sacks, black plastic bags, and fuel from the dormitory, returning to the abandoned factory where he had left the suitcase the day before. He wrapped Trang's head in multiple layers of plastic bags and rice sacks, then poured fuel on and burned the suitcase and Trang's clothing. After completing everything, he brought the carefully wrapped head back to the dormitory. Taking advantage of the late night when no one was around, he climbed over the fence behind the dormitory, snuck into the guava orchard right next door, and threw it into the bushes. Then he quietly returned to the dormitory and lay down to rest, as if he had just completed a routine task. At this point, all evidence of his crime had been disposed of by his own hands, and he continued going to work and living normally as if nothing had happened. Hawaii told this story through his tears, but prosecutors didn't fully accept his account. Although he portrayed deep affection, even bringing up how Trang had appeared in his dreams, someone who said, "I don't need her anymore." If he truly still loved her, why would he use such a brutal method to bring her back to Tainan? Even after arriving in Tainan, he didn't give her a proper burial, but casually discarded her remains in the bushes. Police also suspected that Hawaii had deliberately thrown Trang's upper body into the drainage ditch, intending to use floodwaters from a recently passed typhoon to wash away crucial evidence. Later, when Hawaii learned that police had only found Trang's lower body, while the upper body had long been swept away by floodwaters and could never be recovered, he again collapsed and cried loudly on the spot, begging police to make sure Trang's body could be kept whole. However, some wrongs cannot be made right simply by recovering remains. In December 2014, Hawaii was sentenced to 18 years in prison for murder and corpse abandonment. He would be deported to Vietnam after serving his sentence. The prosecutor recalled that after the verdict was handed down, he once asked Hawaii what plans he had for the future after his release. Hawaii simply replied flatly, "My wife is gone. I don't even know if my daughter still remembers me. Many things have changed. I'll figure it out later." Perhaps from the moment the third party appeared, Hawaii's life had completely changed. If Trang had never met Wen Guang, perhaps the two would still have what seemed like a bright future. If Wen Guang had never made that phone call to report to police, perhaps investigators would never have been able to identify Hawaii as the killer. However, everything in this world seems to have its fate. Just as no one could have imagined that a lover's vow would become a brutal tragedy. And that concludes today's heartbreaking case. What are your thoughts on this case? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.